almost 6:10. Thank you all for coming. It's really a very diverse audience, and we have so many honorable guests as well. His Excellency Yusuf Ibrahim, of course, our guide, His Excellency Ahmad Bastaki, His Excellency the Ambassador of the US, Ambassador of the UK, Australia, and many others that are here, honorable guests and friends. And we are very lucky to have Tom today. He's going to speak about, he's going to have a discussion actually under the theme of the world is fast, how to understand it and thrive in it. So let me just say a few words without giving too much of the talk. I mean, basically the discussion, our aim is to explore ways in which countries, in particular in the Arab world, could successfully cope with a world that is moving fast on account of three mutually reinforcing forces in the realm of globalization, the digital revolution, and climate change. And the rest you will need to actually wait and listen to see what exactly is involved in this framework. I just want to first tell you how the discussion will unfold. First, I will just give a brief introduction to motivate the discussion and to introduce Tom. Then Tom will speak for about 45 minutes. Then I'll try to have Tom expand a little bit on the applications of his ideas to the Arab world in particular. So we will have also a few minutes further discussion. And then I will open up for question and answer. We have 2 hours. We are aiming at ending at about 8 o'clock. And then we will move the discussion to the reception on the first floor. We have coffee and cookies and so on. And there you can have a one-on-one discussion with Tom. And also you will have the opportunity to discuss topics that are not necessarily presented or discussed in this session. So we will try as much as possible to focus during these 2 hours, during this session, on matters related to the theme of the discussion, which is the issues of globalization and the digital revolution, climate change, and any topic, any issue that Tom raises. And then we'll leave, because Tom has written on so many, in so many fields that I know you'll be tempted to actually ask, even if on topics that are not raised. So we'll try as much as possible to keep it for the second part of this evening. And that will be, again, starting at 8 o'clock. When we end, we'll move to the first floor and we'll discuss more. Also, I would ask you to just silence your cell phones. And also this is recorded, so it's particularly important not to have cell phones ringing. First, I received many questions regarding the context of this. First of all, the CEF, what's the CEF and what's its relation with the Arab Fund? And what is this new series, the joint CEF Arab Fund series? So I just want to say a few words. Basically, the idea behind the series emerged out of many discussions with Mr. Abdul Latif Al-Hamad, the chairman of the Arab Fund. We had many conversations, and anyone who speaks, who had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Abdul Latif Al-Hamad would appreciate really the brilliance of his economic ideas, as well as his vision. And Tom, you had also the chance to speak with Abdul Latif, I think many years ago. And so over time, what really became clear is that what is missing in terms of our own program at the Center for Economics and Finance is a series that deals with inclusive development. We have many courses that actually deal with economic issues and are quite well focused on how to raise real GDP growth, how to raise living standards. But what we need is a series of discussions that take a broader view, a multidisciplinary approach. And in addition to addressing specific topics of how to undertake economic reforms remaining within the general area of economics. And so we had our first panel discussion, which took place in September, dealt with the subsidy reform, the economic implications of subsidy reform in Kuwait and the Arab world. And then we planned another session on tax reform, which will come in January, tax reform also in Kuwait and the Arab world, which are two very important, very practical panel discussions focus on very specific topics. But what we really were looking for was a lecture that informed policymakers on how to have well-rounded growth, the inclusive growth, which actually takes into account the interest of not only one particular group, but the poor and the rich, the groups in various geographic areas, the current generation, the future generations. So one that actually takes a long view on development, broad and looked at in broadest terms. And the challenge is that we needed somebody who could speak on development, but drawing on the core fields that actually are so crucial for development: education, environment, the technological revolution. And at first, of course, we had in mind some Nobel laureates in economics, but those actually we found out that it still doesn't fulfill this. They would draw from economics to economics. We wanted somebody who would draw from have a multidisciplinary approach with conclusions that are relevant for inclusive development, and also that can influence policymakers, that are presented in a way that is understandable and in a way that gets to the core of these issues. And then I remember that I had breakfast not too long ago with Tom in Washington, where we both live, and precisely the issues that we were trying to address were discussed, and so I said, okay, let me try my luck and see if Tom would like to come, expecting him to say, I'm too busy, and how come you're telling me? And I called, and I said, Tom, can you come and be a speaker in one of our discussions, our panel discussions? And he said, sure. And he was so generous with the time, because it was not really planned in advance. It was at a very short notice. So thanks, Tom, for coming at very short notice. And then the second, I think, set of questions is why are we doing this in Kuwait, and what is the relation between the Center for Economics and Finance and the Arab Fund? First of all, for those of you who are old enough, you remember that in the 60s, late 60s, there was a search for the best place to have the Arab Fund, the base, the host country for the Arab Fund. And Kuwait was the ideal location at that time, because it really was the center of intellectual activity in the Arab world. It was regarded as the cradle where Arab scholars could discuss freely, and the analysis, the rigor of the analysis that they produced was so much admired. And of course, there were so many famous periodicals and publications and schools and training centers. At the same time, Kuwait, of course, had the approach, placed high value to serving the wider Arab community. And so the Kuwait was chosen as the place. Similarly, in 2010, when there was a search for a place for a training center for the Arab world, the Kuwait Investment Authority was generous to finance a center that is an IMF center that is intended to be an investment in the human capital, not a conventional investment, but an investment in human capital of Kuwait in service to the Arab world. And so these are the similarities. So they are, in many ways, natural partners. And so Tom was again the ideal person for this particular purpose. And also, I would like to say to respond to some of the questions as to, well, why haven't you invited an Arab speaker? This is also one of the questions that was often asked, and my answer is that it is very important to be as open as possible in terms of the viewpoints that are discussed. And Tom is a very influential writer. Or he won 3 Pulitzer Prizes, the National Book Award, many awards. When he speaks, when he writes, people listen all over the world. So if you want to have an influence on world opinion, this is a good chance, because this is a forum where everyone has a chance to debate and to challenge ideas. So without further ado, please, Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a treat to be back here in Kuwait and at the Arab Fund, and thanks to your IMF program and team and my friend Abdul Latif Al-Hamid. I'm sorry he isn't here, but we're going to enjoy his hospitality. And thank you all for coming out. I am going to talk about my new book today, the book I'm working on. It's actually called Thank You for Being Late. And the title of the book actually comes from meeting people in Washington, D.C. over the last year. And people would meet me for breakfast, and they would come 15, 20 minutes late. And they would say, I'm really sorry, Mr. Friedman, it was the subway, it was the weather, it was the traffic, it was the dog ate my homework. And I found myself spontaneously saying to them, actually, no. Thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on the conversation right next door. I've been people watching the lobby, fantastic. And I just connected 2 ideas that I've been struggling with for the last month. So thank you for being late. And people started saying, well, you're welcome. But thank you for being late is really a play on the fact that what the book really could be called is The World is Fast. And that's a lot of bit about what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. You know, 50 years from now, when historians look back at this moment, the first part of the 21st century, and ask what was the most important thing happening in the beginning of the 20th century, what do you suppose they'll say? They say it was subprime crisis of 2008, the clash of 9/11? Will they say it was the breakup of Brad and Jen? Or the marriage of William and Kate? What will they say? I think what they will say is in the early 20th century, the world experienced the greatest technological inflection point since Gutenberg invented the printing press. That's what I think we're in the middle of right now. You know, someone was alive when Gutenberg invented the printing press. And some monk said to some priest, whoa, this is really cool. I don't have to write these Bibles out longhand anymore. I can just stamp them out. Someone was alive then. You're alive. We're all alive at a similar massive inflection point, with one difference. Gutenberg revolution played out very slowly over 300 years. You're alive at a moment, had this been Gutenberg, when everyone got a printing press in the world the same day and everyone could read, all at the same time. You're actually alive at another turning point. It was February 14th, 2011. And the transformative moment happened in a very unusual place, on an American game show called Jeopardy! And there were 3 contestants. One was Greg Jennings, the all-time Jeopardy! Champion. The second was Brad Rutter, the second all-time Jeopardy! Champion. And the third contestant simply went by his, or maybe it was hers, last name. Can you stand back a little bit? Thanks. Just a second. His or her last name, and that was Watson. And over 3 days, Mr., or was it Mrs., Watson defeated the all-time Jeopardy! Champions. And on day 1, second question in the show, Watson buzzed in and answered the question and made history. And the question was, iron fitting on the hoof of a horse or a card dealing box in a casino, 1, 2, half second. In 2.5 seconds, Watson, which of course was an IBM computer, answered a question posed in natural language, and the question was a pun. What is an iron fitting on the hoof of a horse or a card dealing box in a casino? And Watson buzzed in and said, what is a shoe? And when Watson answered that question, the world changed, and it changed forever. A computer has never answered a question like that posed in natural language. And that answer will go down in history, I believe, with another question posed by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876 to another Watson, Thomas Watson, his assistant. And that question was, Mr. Watson, please come here. And that was the first telephone call ever made. So we are at, I believe, one of the great technological inflection points in the history of the world. And what I want to talk about this evening are what are the implications of this inflection point on jobs, education, the workplace, countries, and leadership. Now, I've been influenced a lot in my thinking by a book I read a year and a half ago called The Second Machine Age by Eric Brynjolfsson and Andy McAfee, two MIT Sloan School professors. And their book argues that the first machine age was built on the steam engine. And the steam engine, you'll recall, doubled in power roughly every 70 years. And what distinguished steam power was that it was very much a complement to human labor. You needed human labor to direct steam power. What Andy and Eric argue is that we are now in the second machine age. And the second machine age is built on Moore's law, the theorem laid down by Gordon Moore, one of the co-founders of Intel, exactly, or just a little over now 50 years ago, that the speed and power of microchips will double every 24 months, and the price will roughly fall by 50%. And to this day, 50 years later, Moore's law has basically held up. When you're in the second machine age, though, Andy and Eric argue, increasingly machines are not a complement to human labor, they become a substitute for human labor, which is the challenge we're facing right now. Because unlike the steam engine, Moore's law grows exponentially. And the image they use to illustrate that, a very popular image in Silicon Valley, because it's very hard for humans to grasp exponential growth. They tell the story of the man who invented the game of chess, and he gave the game to the king, and the king loved it and said, "Good sir, how can I reward you?" And the man said, "Your Highness, I just would like to feed my family." "Well, what would you like?" he said. "I'd actually just like you to take one kernel of rice and put it on the first square of this chessboard, and 2 on the second, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, 16 on the next. Just keep doubling it exponentially, and my family will be fine." The king said, "It shall be done," not realizing that when you double something 63 times, the number you get is 18 quintillion. More rice that existed on the planet. That is the power of exponential growth. In researching my book, I went out to Intel, interviewed Brian Krasanich, the CEO of Intel, and he gave me a real live example of exponential growth that Intel engineers drew up. They set themselves the following task. They said, what if the auto industry improved at the same exponential rate that Moore's Law did the microchip industry? And they took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle and said, what if all its key components improved at the same rate of Moore's Law? And they found that if that had been the case, a Volkswagen Beetle today would go 300,000 miles per hour, it would get 2 million miles per gallon, and would cost 4 cents. That's the power of exponential growth. Intel engineers also estimated that the mileage, if mileage fuel efficiency increased at the same rate of Moore's Law, you would basically be able to drive your car for your whole life on 1 tank of gasoline. So we're dealing with a very, very powerful force right now in technology, driving this inflection point. Now, what are the signs of it? So one of the ways I learn as a journalist is I try to listen very closely to the way people speak. And I know something's happening when people start saying the most bizarre things, not realizing they're saying anything unusual. Starting with myself. Because I wrote The World is Flat, a book about the world getting connected, in 2004. That's when I started it. In 2011, I wrote another book with my friend Michael Mandelbaum about America called That Used to Be Us. And when I sat down in 2011 to write that book, the first thing I did was I went and got the first edition of The World is Flat off my bookshelf just to remind myself what I wrote. I opened it to the index. I looked under A, B, C, D, E, F, F, A, C, E, B, O. Facebook wasn't in it. Yeah, when I was running around the world in 2004 telling people the world is flat, folks. We're all connected. Facebook didn't exist. Twitter was still a sound. The cloud was still in the sky. 4G was a parking place. LinkedIn was a prison. Applications were what you sent to college. Big data was a rap star. And Skype was a typographical error. All of that happened in the 7 years between those 2 books. That is exponential change, the likes of which we've never seen. What else? What else have I been hearing? So I was at a lecture last year in Europe, actually by Andy McAfee from MIT. And at one point he referred to Garry Kasparov, the Russian chess grandmaster, as the last human chess champion. I thought, wow, never heard that before. We're in the age of the last human bus driver, last human taxi driver, last human chess champion. A little while later, I was out in San Francisco in Silicon Valley, interviewing Sebastian Thrun, the founder of Udacity, a first leader of Google X. He actually invented the first MOOC. He was the artificial intelligence professor at Stanford who had 140,000 students in his class from around the world. Sebastian was telling me he'd recently been taking flying lessons. We got on the subject of flying, and somehow we got on the subject of the air crash, ASEAN air crash 3 years ago at San Francisco Airport. And Sebastian said to me, you know, Tom, that plane crashed because of good weather. I said, no, you mean the plane crashed because of bad weather? He said, no. Had there been bad weather, they'd have been on autopilot. The plane never would have crashed. The plane crashed because of good weather. I had the honor recently of being invited to Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, to be their Saturday morning speaker. They have a famous Saturday morning town hall there. It's actually the warm-up act for Kevin Costner. And the Walmart CEO invited me. He said, would you come? I said, I'll come, but I said, I want to be paid. And I want to be paid a lot. But the New York Times does not allow me to accept any money. So here's how I want to be paid. I want you to get your IT team together and show me what happens if I try to buy a 32-inch television on Walmart's mobile app off my cell phone. Walk me through everything technologically that happens behind the scene. They agreed to do that. Brought the team down, we walked through everything. They explained to me that when you swipe on Walmart's mobile app, the pages move at between 7 and 14 milliseconds. If it goes up to 25 milliseconds, a thousandth of a second, they start losing customers. But the chief engineer said, once you press buy, and the algorithm then has to figure out, do we want you to pick it up at a Walmart store? Do we want to deliver it to you? Do we want the manufacturer to send it to you? He said, once you press buy, then we have all kinds of time. Then we have a second. I said, what did you say? He said, what did I say? I said, you said, then we have all kinds of time. Then we have a second. That's the kind of quantum speed we're talking about. A few weeks later, I got to play, I'm a golfer, I got to play in the AT&T golf tournament. Dream my whole life in Pebble Beach. Great fun. It's a kind of a slow tournament, though. Lots of players. Standing on a hole with my caddy. We're waiting to move. We got on the subject of a hotel in Carmel. And my caddy said to me, you know, Mr. Friedman, President Kennedy had a lot of fun at that hotel before the internet. I said, what did you say? Oh, we got a new historical divide now. BI and AI. Before the internet and after the internet. Before privacy and after privacy. President Kennedy had a lot of fun there before privacy got lost. Got to visit Google X last month, Google's research center. They took me for a ride on the Google autonomous vehicle. Amazing experience. In the front seat, on the right seat, is a Google engineer. She's got her laptop open and she's showing me what the car is seeing. In the left seat, in the driver's seat, behind the steering wheel, is just a Google employee who's sitting there so other drivers won't freak out that nobody's driving the car. And I'm in the back seat. And I was really waiting to see what would be my reaction. I mean, we're driving through the streets of Mountain View and the car is driving itself, pre-programmed, and I had no idea. And in about 5 minutes, I realized I'd actually never felt safer in a vehicle. And I said that to the Google engineer, and she said, well, of course, Mr. Friedman, this car has no blind spots. This car has no blind spots. The Google autonomous vehicle has driven over 1 million miles in Mountain View. It has been in 12 accidents, and all 12 it was hit from behind by human beings. This car has no blind spots. It reminded me when I was there, I'd been interviewing Mark Bohr, a chip designer at Intel, and he told me he was sure that before he dies, his grandchildren will say to him, Grandpa, is it really true They once let you drive a 2,000-pound vehicle at 80 miles an hour without sensors, software, and the computer driving. Is that true, Grandpa? We are so much closer to that than you think. Then I came across this article in TechCrunch, really one of my favorite leads of the year, written by Tom Goodwin. And the story began like this. Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, has no inventory. And Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider now, owns no real estate. Something interesting is happening. It sure is. And it reminds me of something that the Watson engineer, I got to meet Watson actually, I was at IBM's research center, said to me after showing me the computer. He said, you know, Tom, you know when you buy a new car, it always comes with a sticker on the rearview mirror that says objects in your rearview mirror may be closer than they appear. He says that belongs on the front windshield now. It's the stuff coming at you, friends, that is so much closer than it appears. Now, what are the implications of this? Because that's really going to be something we all have to wrestle with. Well, it has manifold implications. First implication is that this is an amazing time to be a maker. If you want to make something now, as an individual, you can now rent time, space, and tools off the cloud for pennies on the dollar, and you can start a company and make anything from anywhere for a price point and with power tools that were unimaginable a decade ago. This is a fantastic time to be a maker. I'd like to illustrate that with something I came across. I was up at GE Labs recently, up in upstate New York, and they told me about how they're now doing a lot of innovation. And they call it jump ball. Jump ball. For those of you who follow basketball, you know the game begins with the referee throws up the ball and the two 7-foot guys jump for it. Well, that's how GE does innovation now. The way they do it is 2013, this is an example of how they do it. GE launched the GE Engine Bracket Challenge. And what they did was, they decided there was a part that went on the wing of an airplane that helped attach the engine to the wing, the GE engine. And you know, when you're in the airplane business, anytime you can take weight out of something, that's like a huge deal. So they put the specifications on the current GE bracket, which at the time weighed about 5 kilos. And they put all the specifications out there. And they simply invited, they posted this on an engineering website, anyone in the world to compete for who could take the most weight out of this bracket, and the winner would get $10,000. And they had to do it with 3D manufacturing. In 3 weeks, they got 697 entries from around the world. They winnowed them down to the best 10. GE tested them all out. And each one of them got $1,000, and the winner got $7,000. Of those 10, not a single one was an American, and not a single one was an aeronautical engineer. The winner was a 21-year-old from Indonesia. His name was Ari Kurniawan, a 21-year-old from Salatiga in central Java, who had his own company. The original bracket, weighed 4.5 pounds, and he took 84% of the weight out without losing any of the strength. GE adopted it, implemented it, and that's now their bracket. Mr. Kurniawan won the jump ball. More and more innovation now is going to be done by companies just putting these challenges out there. Jump ball and see who can jump for it. And your kids and mine better be able to jump for that ball, because there's now a 21-year-old in Central Java who beat every GE engineer. It's an amazing time to be a maker. It's an amazing time to be a maker because also you can get the skills to make things more cheaply and efficiently than ever before. And researching the book, I went to Udacity, which is an online learning platform in Silicon Valley, run by Sebastian Thrun, as I said. And they enabled me to interview one of their students on Skype. And they thought, given the fact that I lived in Beirut for 5 years, I would enjoy meeting this young woman, 26 years old, who was taking their advanced web page design course. And I interviewed her on Skype, and she explained that she's taking the Udacity web page design course from Beirut online to better serve her customers in Australia. So I was sitting in Silicon Valley interviewing a Lebanese woman in Beirut who's taking Udacity's online course to better serve her customers in Australia. Oh, it's a great time to be a maker. It's also a fantastic time to be a maker because with big data analytics, guessing is officially over. Guessing, that is so like 20th century. Guessing is officially over. An example I like to give is Microsoft's connected cow. So last year, Microsoft launched a project with Fujitsu in Japan with a group of Japanese dairy farmers where they put pedometers, Fitbits basically, on the hoofs of all the cows in these dairy farms. And they connected the pedometers wirelessly to the Microsoft cloud. And what they quickly discovered was that when cows are in estrus, when they are in heat, every 21 days, they start taking more steps. And this is incredibly important for a dairy farmer because if you know exactly when a cow is in heat, that's when you can artificially inseminate. And so what they started doing was they put all the pedometers on all the cows, and they would simply send a text message to the farmer any time of day when a cow was in heat. And he would come and artificially inseminate. And they quickly discovered that, because they had all the big data, that if he did it in the first 4 hours after estrus, he had a 70% chance of getting a female. And if he did it in the next 4 hours, he had a 70% chance of getting a male. So think about this farmer. For 30 years, he worked on the farm. And over those 30 years, he developed something called intuition. Intuition. I think Bessie's in heat. I think Bessie's in heat. Let's try to artificially inseminate her, see what happens. I've been around this farm a long time. I can tell when Bessie the cow is in heat. That's called intuition. Intuition is also so 20th century. Because what is intuition? Intuition is using experience to recognize a weak signal. And with big data now, every weak signal, every needle in a haystack now can stand out. Guessing is officially over. And that makes it an amazing time to be a maker. Unfortunately, when it's a great time to be a maker, it's a great time to be a breaker. Oh, if you want to break something, and unfortunately we've had so many tragic examples of that in the last week, using this same technology platform. If you want to break something, you were really born at the right time. I could give you some indications from Paris, but I'll use an earlier example that came up a couple weeks ago. Amazing story in the American press. It was a story about a Kosovo hacker based in Malaysia from the, whoever heard of this, the Kosovo Hackers Security Society, who, according to the story in the Washington Post, hacked into a server used by a U.S. online retail company and obtained data on 100,000 people. His name was Farizi. He was then accused of passing the data to the Islamic State member Junaid Hussain, a British citizen, who then posted links on Twitter to all the names, email addresses, passwords, locations, and phone numbers of 1,351 U.S. military service personnel and other government personnel who were among those 100,000. And he included a warning that the Islamic State soldiers will strike your necks and in your lands. The FBI tracked the Kosovo hacker to a computer address in Malaysia, where he was arrested, and they killed the IS guy, the ISIS guy, with a drone in Syria. Think about that story. An Albanian hacker in Malaysia collaborating with an ISIS guy on Twitter to intimidate US soldiers online before we tracked one guy down to Malaysia and killed the other guy with a drone. That is the world of breakers today. Now, it's also, alas, a hard time to be a leader in the fast world. Hard time to be a leader. In fact, truth be told, you don't want to lead anything in the fast world. Because every leader today in the fast world has to be in a two-way conversation with the led. The days of top-down, command and control, one-way conversations, that is also so 20th century. Every leader today has to be in a two-way conversation, and it is incredibly noisy. So my friend Kurt Carlson, who runs Stanford Research Institute, called SRI, geez, if you put an I in there, it'd be called Siri, and that's right, they invented Siri and sold it to Steve Jobs of Apple. Kurt has a nice saying, and I turned it into what I call Carlson's Law. And that is, in the fast world, everything now top-down is dumb and slow. Everything bottom-up is smart but chaotic. And therefore, the sweet spot for leadership is moving down. It's moving to the middle. And to me, today, the key to leadership is learning to lead from the middle. You want to be close enough to what's coming up from the bottom to be able to edit it, cull it out, find the wisdom in it, but you also want to be high enough to be able to see the next horizon, how it can be leveraged and mobilized. If you're totally in the bottom, you'll get lost. If you're totally on the top floor in days of old, you'll never see it. So the sweet spot for leadership is now moving down to the middle. But it's basically going to be hell on wheels to lead anything anymore. I don't know if you've ever gone to glassdoor.com, if it's come to Kuwait or in Arabic, but it's a website that basically allows employees of a company to post anything they want about their boss, including their salary, promotions, any complaint. We all now live in glass houses with glass doors, and it's just the beginning. You don't want to lead anything in the second half of the chessboard. Now, average is not only over for leaders, but average is also over for countries. You see, in the Cold War, you could be an average little country. There were two superpowers out there ready to throw money at you, build your government house, fund your army. Egypt and Syria could lose a couple of wars, the Soviet Union would rebuild it. Would educate your kids at Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow or Wichita State in America. And there was no country called China that could come in and take your low-wage labor. It was really okay to be average during the Cold War, average country. There was also no climate change to really worry about. Flash forward to today. No superpowers, want to fund anything or put their hands on anything anymore. I mean, Putin in Syria, that's a freak. You're not going to see that, because all you win is a bill now. Nobody wants to do that. They look at foreign students not as scholarships, but as sources of income for their universities. Climate change is hammering countries now. And China? Whoa. I was in Egypt for Tahrir Square Revolution. I was there for 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, I went home. I'd been away from my wife for 3 weeks. I was in Cairo Airport, walked into the souvenir shop. Buy Mrs. Friedman a little souvenir to remind her where her honey was for 3 weeks. What would Mrs. Friedman like? Why, here's a Pyramids ashtray. Turns out Mrs. Friedman doesn't smoke, but it'll remind her where honey was. Turn it over, and what does it say on the bottom? Made in China. Yeah, you're the lowest wage country in the Eastern Mediterranean, and there's now a country half a world away called China that can turn your national icon into an ashtray, manufacture it, ship it cheaper than you can, and make a profit. Average is over for every country. And what you're seeing in the world today is strong countries are being stressed, and some weak ones are just blowing up. And that's why the new divide in the world is no longer east, west, north, south. The new divide in the world is between the world of order and the world of disorder. And what you're seeing in the Mediterranean today are thousands of people trying to get out of the world of disorder into the world of order. And we're just at the beginning of this. As the UN reported last month, there are more people on the move now in the world since World War II. And there's no world war going on. What there is countries literally blowing up. Have I ruined your dinner yet? Okay, because if not, I've got more material coming. Okay. Because the real centerpiece that Kuwait is wrestling with, and that my country's wrestling with, is that average is over now for every worker. Average is officially over for every worker. I mean, you've heard the story, the modern American factory. Just 2 employees. Just 2 employees now, a man and a dog. The man is there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to keep the man away from the machines. I exaggerate, but that's where this is going. Study by the Oxford Martin School came out last year. 47% of current jobs will be automated basically over the next couple of decades. And as a result, the thing that sustained the American middle class for 50 years after World War II was something called the high-wage middle-skilled job. High-wage middle-skilled. Today, friends, MAFI high-wage middle-skilled job. Okay. Rah, that is so over. There's high-wage high-skilled job, and there's low-wage low-skilled job. But there is no longer something called a high-wage middle-skilled job. And that is going to be a huge, huge issue. We had a story in the New York Times last year about dairy farms. I'm into dairy farms. In upstate New York, have all moved to robotic cow milkers. A human hand does not touch these cows. So you were a kid in upstate New York. Maybe you completed high school, didn't want to go to college. But hey, you'd go to work at a dairy farm. $15 an hour, milking the cows. Milking the cows. You're that kid today. You will not get near a cow or a dairy farm unless you majored in computer science. That's as close as you'll get. Average is officially over. Every middle-class job is now being pulled in 3 directions at once. It's being pulled up. It requires more skill. It's being pulled out, more machines, robots, software, or people in India, China, or Kuwait can compete for it. Or it's being pulled down. It's being outsourced to history, made obsolete faster than ever. Every job now is being pulled in 3 directions at once. And education, as a result, has to attack all 3 of those directions. If jobs are being pulled up, what does that mean? It means more of the 3 R's, more reading, writing, and arithmetic. Your baseline skill level is going to have to be higher, and your lifelong learning is going to have to be truly lifelong. But it isn't just about the 3 R's. We had a story, again, in the New York Times recently, that the highest paid jobs are not STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, and math. Actually, the highest paid jobs are what I call STEMpathy jobs. Jobs that combine computing, knowledge skills, and human empathy. There was a study, came out, we reported on. The headline on this article in the New York Times, which I really like, was "Why What You Learned in Preschool is Crucial at Work Today." And the story said that for all the jobs that machines can now do, whether performing surgery, driving cars, or serving food, they still lack one distinctly human trait: they have no social skills. Yet skills like cooperation, empathy, and flexibility have become increasingly vital in modern-day work. As the story noted, occupations that require strong social skills have grown much more than others since 1980, according to new research. And the only occupations that have shown consistent wage growth since 2000 are jobs that require both cognitive and social skills. Yet to prepare students for the change in the way we work, the skills that schools teach may need to change as well. Social skills are rarely emphasized in traditional education. And you can see how this is going to happen. Because if you go to Cleveland Clinic now, or you go to MD Anderson, if, God forbid, you or one of your loved ones is diagnosed with cancer, you will go into a room and there'll be your doctor, there'll be you and your family, and there'll be Dr. Watson. Because Dr. Watson has now read every article on cancer ever written. And in 5 years, you will not go to the first question you'll ask, if God forbid you have any disease, is, does my hospital have Watson? Because I only want to go to a hospital where there's a computer I can ask diagnostic questions to who's read every article ever on cancer. When I was up at IBM 2 months ago, meeting with the Watson team, they said, we're getting Watson ready to take the radiological boards. Yeah. And once he's done those, he'll take the oncology boards. And once he's done those, he'll just work right through it all. So the doctor you want is a doctor who can, on the one hand, ask the right questions. What Watson puts a premium on is not knowing the answers. By the way, parenthetically, no boss anymore cares what you know. Because either Watson or the Google machine knows everything. We couldn't care less what you know. All they care is what you can do with what you know. That's all anyone is going to pay you for. So you want a doctor who's really good at asking Watson the right questions and really empathetic in relating to you or your patient. And those skills, that balance of skills, is really coming to every job. That's what it means to move up. What does it mean to move out? Well, when more machines, robots, software, people in India, China, or Kuwait can compete with my girls for a job. What it means is you don't just want more of the 3 R's, read, write, and arithmetic, or more of the 3 C's, creativity, collaboration, communication. That's really what empathy is about. You want more of the 3 M's. M cubed. Self-motivation. Grit, persistence. The premium on self-motivation, the willingness to learn how to learn constantly in a world where so many machines, robots, or people around the world can go after that jump ball. there's going to be a huge premium on young people who are self-motivated. And lastly, if every job's being moved down, outsourced to history faster, what does that mean? It means you want every one of your students to be entrepreneurial. As Tony Wagner of Harvard says, you don't want your kids to graduate here at Kuwait University or Kuwait High School college ready. College ready. That truly is so 1990s. You want them to graduate innovation ready. That's the real challenge. As I tell my girls, I'm an old fuddy-duddy. When I graduated from college, I got to find a job. You will have to invent a job. That's the difference between us and our kids. Oh, my girls got lucky, you get your first job, but to stay in that job, advance in that job, you will have to invent, reinvent, and re-engineer that job so many more times than I did. And the chance of my daughters working at the same company as I have for 34 years is exactly 0. So if all jobs are being pulled in 3 directions at once, then education, it seems to me, has to mirror and enable every student to compete in those 3 directions. Now let me conclude by trying to preempt the first question, because I've given this talk before, and often the first question is, Mr. Friedman, you referred to your own daughters. My oldest daughter's 30, my youngest daughter's 27. You've told us about the world that you see. What do you tell your own kids? What do you tell your own kids? Well, they're really tired of hearing it. But you're all fresh meat, so I'm going to share it with you. I have sort of 5 pieces of advice for my girls. First piece of advice is, girls, always think like a new immigrant. Always think like a new immigrant. Who's the new immigrant? In America, at least. New immigrants, as an Armenian friend of mine liked to say, are paranoid optimists. They're optimists because they came from somewhere awful to somewhere they thought would be better, but they're always paranoid. They think it can be taken away from them at any second. They showed up here in Kuwait City, they know one thing. There's no legacy spot waiting for them at Kuwait University. So they better pursue their passion and their opportunity with more grit, persistence, and energy than anybody else. Friends, always think like a new immigrant, because in fact, we're all new immigrants to the fast world. Second, always think like an artisan. I got this idea from Larry Katz at Harvard, a labor economist. Who is the artisan? Artisan was that person in the Middle Ages, before mass manufacturing and factories, who made every item individually, every item one-off. Every chandelier, every spoon, fork, and knife, plate, table, chair, every dress, every shoe, every saddle, and every stirrup, the artisan made individually. And what did the best artisans do? They brought so much human, so much creative empathy to what they did, so much unique value add, that they carved their initials into their work at the end of the day. Do your job every day as if at the end of the day you want to carve your initials in it because you brought so much unique human capital to it. That's a job that will never be outsourced, automated, or digitized. Third, always be in beta. This is an idea I got from Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. Reid likes to say in Silicon Valley there's only one 4-letter word. Actually, it's not 4 letters, but it does start with an F. And that word is finished. If you ever think of yourself as a finished product, in Silicon Valley, you are really finished. Reid's motto is always be in beta. Beta is the stage in the development of a new technology or software when it's about 85% done. They throw it over the wall to the community, they test it, they find all the holes, all the glitches, all the errors, they throw it back, they work on it some more, they throw it back over the wall. Reid's motto is always be in beta. Always in your state of mind, be in the mindset of someone who thinks they need to constantly relearn, retool, and re-engineer yourself. Never think of yourself as finished. Because if you do, you really are finished. Fourth, I live by the equation PQ plus CQ is always greater than IQ. Oh yeah, you give me a young Kuwaiti today who has a high passion quotient and a high curiosity quotient, high PQ and CQ, in a world where nobody cares what you know, but only what you can do with what you know, and I'll take them over the kid with a high IQ 7 days a week. In this world, PQ plus CQ will always trump IQ. Lastly, I tell my girls, always think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House in Minneapolis, my hometown. When I was working on my last book, I was home in Minneapolis, where I grew up, having breakfast on a Sunday morning with my best friend, Ken Greer, at Perkins Pancake House on Highway 100 and France Avenue, my favorite restaurant. I ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and scrambled eggs. Ken ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and fruit. And after 15 minutes, the waitress came back. She put our 2 plates down. And all she said to Ken was, "I gave you extra fruit." That's all she said. I gave her a 50% tip. Why did I give her a 50% tip? Because that waitress didn't control much, but she controlled the fruit ladle. And what was she doing in her own little way, in her own little world? She was acting entrepreneurial. I think I'll give this guy just a little extra fruit and see what happens. What happened was she got a 50% tip. She was thinking entrepreneurial. Whatever you do, whether you work at this great institution, at Kuwait University, at the oil and gas company here, or in a government office, always think entrepreneurially. Where can I fork off, find a new opportunity? Where can I create a new business? Because the days when the Kuwait Oil Company or Ford Motor or General Motors are going to come to your town and mine with 25,000 jobs, oh friends, those days are over. That 25,000 person factory is now 500 people and 2,500 robots. We need 5 people creating jobs for 10, 10 people creating jobs for 30, 30 people creating jobs for 50. That's how we're going to get the jobs. That only happens if we're all relentlessly entrepreneurial. So friends, if you take nothing else from this talk, please take this. Always think like a new immigrant and stay hungry. Always think like an artisan and take pride. Always think like a starter up in Silicon Valley and be in beta. Always remember that PQ plus CQ is greater than IQ. And always think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House and be relentlessly entrepreneurial. Because this little Minnesota boy can tell you, we all really do live in Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, where all the men are strong, all the women are beautiful, and all the children need to be above average. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. We're going just to discuss for maybe about 15 minutes or so, just take your views on the application of these really fascinating ideas to the Arab world. And then we'll open it up for discussion. Over the past 2 days, I had the opportunity to have a sneak preview into some of the ideas that you presented. And what I did is I took the reports of the 3 organizations that do forecasts, economic forecasts for the Arab world. And of course, it's very obvious which 3 organizations they are, but in any case, they have 2 sets of projections, one with reforms, and the second set without reforms. And the projections without reforms, without structural reforms, without what they call the suitable, appropriate, sound economic policies that are implemented are quite bleak. For many of these countries, not all of them, but many of the Arab countries, they're very bleak. And then I looked at the assumptions they make and the frameworks, the models, the conceptual frameworks, and none of them took into account these three forces, the three sets of forces that you talk about that are tied to the ever-increasing pace of the world, the fast world, rapid globalization, the digital revolution, and climate change. None of them took into account those. Now, the question I have is how much more dire would the consequences be of not implementing these reforms if these three forces are taken into account? So we can go through each of these three sets of forces, and I just would like to have your ideas as they apply to the Arab world. First, with regard to rapid globalization, one set of recommendations in those reports relates to the importance of enabling private sector development, entrepreneurship, the level diversification in the case of, especially in the case of the oil-producing countries, removing restrictions on the flow of trade. And however, when you look at the assumptions, basically the world is not assumed to have all these attributes that you have referred to. So how much more dire?
Let's start there with that on the question of entrepreneurship, because I've always thought of the Arab world, and particularly the Gulf, as a region of traders, merchants, and a region that has a lot of entrepreneurial flair. Obviously, that was dulled by the arrival of oil. But so I was at a STEM conference actually in Denver 2 weeks ago, and I met a teacher there from Thornton, Colorado, who was allowed to found a STEM elementary school. And in Thornton, Colorado, Thornton, Colorado has the biggest trailer park west of the Mississippi. So we're talking about a not a well-off community, and largely Hispanic were the students. And she told me what her school was doing. And starting in first grade, 5-year-olds are required to draw up a business plan and found a company. And they actually work in teams, and they have to present their company to local businessmen who come into the school. So they are teaching entrepreneurship from first grade now, number one. My daughter actually works for Khan Academy, the online learning platform, and Sal Khan, their founder, started a lab school last year, and my daughter's the school director. And at Khan Academy, they teach English, arithmetic, writing, and coding from first grade. They consider being able to code a computer now part of literacy. So, bringing those two things together from absolutely first grade, entrepreneurship and the language of being able to design and code and basically speak the language of what will be commerce in the future, I think very, very important. And this is a trend I see. British schools are going to this. Estonian schools now are requiring coding from first grade. And so I don't know if they do that here, but it's something I think would be really worth thinking about if you're thinking about where the best practices are.
Thanks, Tom. Yesterday, we had the good fortune of having you in one of the classes that we offer at the Center for Economics and Finance on education reform that's done jointly with the World Bank, our sister organization. And it was clear that for some of the countries, there is real inertia in reforming the education system. And then the participants in that class make it clear that these are having serious adverse consequences economically, overall, in terms of the inclusive development. Now, you bring in a new element here, which is that the increasing power of software, computers, and robots corresponding to the digital revolution is requiring workers to rapid, and here I just quote you, to rapidly raise their skills or risk losing their jobs, what you have said yesterday. So what are the challenges that this new digital revolution poses, and to what extent is it making it more imperative to reform the education system in the Arab world?
Well, I didn't bring it with me, but I usually, when I give this talk, I read a sports story, American baseball story. And I go through the whole story, and when I'm done, I explain the story was written by a computer. So the Associated Press now is covering local sports in America almost entirely with computers and software. And so many business now, when you see company earnings reports on Forbes or AP Dow Jones or Bloomberg, those are all written by computer algorithms. All the reporters who used to do that have either moved up and are now doing analytical work, or they've moved out. So do I have 5 years before they start writing columns? I mean, do I have 5 years before there's a Tom Friedman program? At least I'd like to own it, you know, and be able to feed into the algorithm of how to write a column. But, you know, all of us, this is all coming shockingly faster, you know, than people realize. And, you know, we were talking with Kuwaiti friends yesterday and with Osama that you have people, you know, in some government offices here, you know, 4 people doing the job of 1. But there's a computer or software that will be on the market within the year that will be able to do the job of all 5. And so then what happens? And by the way, I'm not picking on Kuwait. I'm worried about this for my own country. I think this is all coming incredibly fast. And you know, I'm really worried about the future of work and actually how we maintain a middle class, which is the foundation, I think, of social stability in any country. But you know, what I find when I travel in this part of the world is people say, you know, Mr. Friedman, you have to understand, we have our own pace here, and you know, we got to move at our own pace, and that will maintain social stability. And I certainly understand and totally respect that. But just tell me your pace is 20 miles an hour, not 5 miles an hour. Because if it is 5 miles an hour, you will be roadkill. There's just no question about it to me. I mean, look what's happened in a universe that so affects Kuwait, and people in this room know better than me. I mean, basically, the Saudis a year ago said, we'd like to destroy the fracking business in North Dakota. And so they took the price of oil down from, you know, 120 or whatever it was to 70, 80. And those guys within a month got efficient at 70, 80. Then they brought it to 60, and they got efficient at 60. Then they brought it to 50, and they got efficient at 50. Now it's 40, and I was in Oklahoma City before I came here interviewing the head of a big, major independent oil and gas company in Oklahoma City. In fact, the biggest, and he told me they're making money fracking and horizontal drilling now using big data, analytics, and technology at $40 a barrel. Then I went out to Google, interviewed Google X, and discovered, you know, Google's actually a major energy company today. They bought Nest. So Nest is the biggest home energy management system in the world. They don't make megawatts, they make negawatts, okay? They're bringing energy efficiency to every home, and Apple on the iPhone 6 has the Apple Home Energy Management System. I watched my daughter turn off her air conditioning in her apartment in Washington from the living room of our vacation home in Colorado. Now, my grandma had a saying, Grandma Friedman. Grandma Friedman used to say, never compete against Google and Apple. It was a little thing Grandma used to say. And the oil and gas countries are now competing against Google and Apple indirectly. You're making megawatts, they're making negawatts. So I always think of this kind of inflection point of something that Dana Meadows, a great environmental scientist at Dartmouth, used to say about climate change, because people would say, is it too late? Aren't we cooked? What's the worth of doing anything? And she had a saying that I think really applies, by the way, to all of us, you and me, because I'm just as worried. We have exactly enough time starting now. I'm not going to tell you it's too late, but it sure isn't too early. So whatever reforms you're going to make, you might want to decide on them in the near future, because you have exactly enough time starting now. Because that's what I feel. What I see in America, what makes me an optimist about America, is that I could speak for the number of invitations I get. The most popular invitation I get is from some town in America. 2 weeks ago it was Denver, where the business community has gotten together with the education, both higher education and public school leadership, with the local government, and they are going to figure this out. And so what you see is business people now getting inside the school system, letting schools know exactly what skills they need and are not getting. When the world was slow, well, they could wait for the schools to figure it out. They don't have that time anymore. And teachers are now being seconded to businesses so they can see how they do things at the cutting edge. That kind of reform trifecta, business, local educators, and local government, they're really getting it together. So if you want to be an optimist about America, please pay no attention to Donald Trump, okay? If you want to be an optimist about America, if you want to be an optimist, stand on your head. Come to my country and stand on your head, because the country looks so much better from the bottom up than the top down, okay? Because if you really want to know the secret of our sauce, what makes America, thank God, surviving, is that it's full of these small towns and cities who just didn't get the word. They didn't get the word that China's going to eat our lunch. They didn't get the word that Germany's going to eat our breakfast. And they just go out and the community comes together and they get the business guys to come down to the public school with the local government, and they say, we're going to figure this out. We're not waiting for Washington to figure this out. If you want a picture of America today, it's actually the space shuttle taking off. These local communities are all the thrust. You've seen the space shuttle take off. It's all this thrust coming from below. But in our case, and maybe in yours, the booster rocket, in our case, Washington, D.C., is cracked and leaking energy. And the pilots in our cockpit are fighting over the flight plan. But thank God we got all this thrust coming from below. And one day we may even patch up the booster rocket and get the pilots to stop fighting over the flight plan. Sounds a little like your parliament. And one day we will absolutely take off. And I hope you join us.
Thanks, Tom. Regarding the climate change, now I myself, when just a few months ago I was doing some projections, and somebody asked me, well, what about the impact of climate change in your projections? And I thought this was really not that significant. Recently, I read a report. It was published and reported in the New York Times, and it was really making very dire predictions on the impact of rising heat and humidity in the Arab Gulf region. Actually, it says that in the Arab Gulf region, there is a serious threat to human life from these heat waves, heat and humidity waves, within the new generation's lifetime. That is, by 2100, that's the end of the century. So in less than 100 years, you'll have a serious problem with outdoors human life in the Gulf region. Now, of course, the resources that are needed to prepare and temper the impact of this heat wave are bound to be substantial. And so they would, I would imagine that they would make it even more pressing the importance of preparing for the rapid globalization and the digital revolution. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, just to bring it to this region, I did a column about it this summer. There was a Iranian city where the temperature in July hit 161 degrees Fahrenheit, heat index. That was 131 degrees Fahrenheit and 90 degrees humidity. So that's unlivable. But I'd also point out the fact that basically 3 Arab governments have fallen in the last 5 years over really climate environment issues. I did a documentary about this last year for Showtime called Years of Living Dangerously. I was part of the documentary, and my job was actually to go to Raqqa province, where I was a year and a half ago, just before ISIS came. because Syria experienced the worst drought, 4-year drought in its modern history from 2006 to 2010, i.e. the 4 years preceding the uprising there. 1 million Syrian farmers and herders left their homes, flocked to the cities, completely overwhelmed the infrastructure. Assad did nothing for them. They didn't start the revolution. But as one of the farmers said to us, with the first call of Allahu Akbar, we could not wait to join. So you will not understand what happened in Syria if you don't understand. It was a major environmental event. Now you'll recall the government in Baghdad fired 2 vice presidents, or all 3 vice presidents, I forgot what it was, because of air conditioning. They failed to get the air conditioning working when the temperature is 131 degrees Fahrenheit. And the Beirut government basically, would have fallen. It can't fall because it's already fallen, but it's over the same issue. In their case, it was collecting garbage in the middle of the summer. But these are all environmental stresses coming to politics. And look, this is not Kuwait's problem to solve. This is a this is a collective action problem. But it's something I think we all have to begin to take seriously, because you are a coastal country, and your biggest cities are built right on the coastline. And if the projections about sea level rise do manifest themselves, you're going to be spending a lot of money on walls, on new seawalls. So, but again, I mean, this is a problem first and all for us, America, because we've been the biggest emitters. And something we've got to take very, very seriously, because more Moore's law drives more globalization drives more climate change. So why don't we go to the audience now and give them a chance.
So now we open it to the audience.
If anybody has a question, please. Are there microphone? The young lady back there.
Well, thank you so much for your exceptional talk.
Thank you.
And I will pick up on one of the examples you gave about cancer, because I happen to volunteer with cancer patients, so I know firsthand.
Interesting.
If you give people enough knowledge, it's not necessarily the only thing that can have them take actions. Mm-hmm. So my question to you, what it takes to change the status quo? It is very difficult to change. And in cancer, I can't figure it out. Maybe in investment I could in my profession, but in cancer, some patients are dying, and you know all the consequences of them. And then you give them exact facts about certain food or lifestyle change, but it's very difficult to change. They don't have a roadmap for the right direction.
Sure,
so
but you're speaking in general, really, about what is it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that
what does it
could
get to?
Applies to politics, economics, social, but maybe cancer example would be more easy to conceptualize.
Sure. It's a very, very interesting question. I really live by one overriding motto, and that is that in the history of the world, no one has ever washed a rented car. I'm a huge believer in that. Really, in the history of all mankind, I think no one has actually ever washed a rented car. And the reason I tell you that is that I really believe ownership is, it may not be sufficient really for the challenge you're talking about, but it's so necessary. And what I mean by that is when a teacher owns their own classroom, when your kid feel like they own their own education, when people feel like they own their own country, they will do so much more than you could ever ask them to do. Any boss. And so if I were to give one just thought over the top of my head, it's really empowering people, giving them a sense of ownership over their future. It won't work for everybody, but what I really find in my own life and as a parent is trusting people with the truth. What so annoys me about my politicians is how so rarely they trust people with the truth. And it's amazing when you do, how people will respond. And people aren't stupid. you know. They know what's going on. I'm a huge fan of a rock group called Neon Trees, and they have a song called Everybody Talks. And that's what you find. Open society, closed society, everybody actually talks. They kind of know what's going down. And when you trust people with the truth, when you look them in the eye and say, friends, we're all in this together, we have a challenge, we've fallen behind, and we gotta pick ourselves up and go forward. I'm not gonna anesthetize this for you anymore. I think it's amazing what people do. So I'm always, whether it's in foreign policy or in my personal life, looking to what will activate people's internal engine. It's a rule I use in foreign policy. I always say about the Middle East only puts a smile on your face when it starts with the people there, not when it starts with us. Because when it starts with people there, it's self-sustaining. And so I'm dancing around the subject because I've never been asked that very good question per se, but those are some of my answers, if that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Young lady there.
Well, in this stressed out world, laughter is very precious, so thank you so much for the laughs that you have given us this evening.
Appreciate that, thank you.
The question, since you have kind of underpinned the whole century which we are now living on technology and the inflection point, what are your thoughts on the digital divide? Does it exist? And is the rift going to widen, or we are going to see a more equal world?
Very good question. So my thoughts on that subject were informed by a woman named Marina Gorbis, who runs the Institute for the Future in Silicon Valley. And I've written about this a little bit, and Marina's motto is, the digital divide is basically over. We're not quite there yet, but basically, the digital divide was something for 10 years ago. Washington, D.C. had internet and rural Virginia didn't, New Delhi had internet and, rural India didn't. We're really rapidly approaching a world, we're not there yet, but basically everyone who wants to will have access to a smartphone or a web-enabled phone in the next 10 years. I mean, we're not there yet, but we're getting very, very close. Marina's argument is the real divide when that happens is the motivational divide. Because once everyone's connected, then the real divide is who has the self-motivation to actually take advantage of everything that's out there. And so I think focusing on the motivational divide as parents, as teachers and leaders, I think that's going to be the big issue going forward, less than the digital divide. Please.
Okay, it's a pleasure again.
Thank you.
Read all your books, everything you write, any
Appreciate
talk,
that.
it's a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate
always
that.
a pleasure.
Nice of you to say.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
I come from Kuwait University, College of Engineering. I have a talk I'm preparing for the new leadership of Kuwait University. It's called Kuwait University at Inflection Point. We are really as you said, education has to change. We have to reform education. We have to change the way we do things. Everything. We have to build things. We have to invent things.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'll tell you one story. We
Please.
are in electrical engineering. The coding is one of the most important aspects. It's been taught now for first graders. Would you imagine we have like 2 courses? They squeeze the coding course into 1 course.
Well.
And they don't understand what's going on in the education world. So I wish if you can give the talk really to our university or our leadership for them to understand what's going on.
Well, we filmed it, and he's welcome to use it anywhere.
In my talk, and we're going to mention the MOOCs, the edX, the Audacity, and actually I took a course in edX in analytics. It's one of the most amazing experiences my PhD.
Interesting.
I had 2 laptops sitting doing coding, a course taught by MIT. It's so impressive. And we actually participated in a competition to design the best code, like if you heard of Netflix.
Yes.
It's an amazing experience.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to transfer this to my students. But this mentality in Kuwait, I mean, it's the standard way of doing things. The world is moving.
Well, let me try to pick up on that, because one of the themes of my book is really just that the world isn't just changing, it's being reshaped.
Exactly.
Okay, so the workplace is being reshaped, leadership is being reshaped, governance is being reshaped, and I didn't really get into it here, but my at the center of my book is not just Moore's law of microchips. Actually, we're in the middle of 5 Moore's laws. One is around microchips, one is around storage chips, one is around software, one is around networking, and one is around sensors. Okay, all 5 are in a Moore's law. And what they've basically melded and merged into is something we now call the cloud. But in my book, I don't use the word the cloud. The cloud sounds so fluffy. Sounds like a Judy Collins song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. Now, this ain't no cloud, folks. This is a supernova. Supernova is the largest energy force known to man. It's the explosion of a star. Only this supernova just keeps exploding, unlike the normal one, and bigger and bigger. So what my book is about is that we are seeing the greatest handoff of energy into the hands of human beings, thanks to this supernova, since fire. I think that's what's going on. And it's really scary, because there are a lot of breakers out there who won't use the fire the way you and your students will. And that's why a big part of my book is, and that's why it's called Thank You for Being Late, is actually about, just to finish this thought, I'm really old-fashioned about a lot of things. I talk the talk of globalization. I don't walk the walk at all. I'm actually a deeply disconnected person. You won't see me on Twitter. You won't see me on Facebook. I'm really incredibly old-fashioned, and kind of for a reason. Because the subtext of my book is that the faster the world gets, the more everything that is old and slow matters more. Good parenting, good teaching, good spiritual leadership, all the stuff you can't download, but you have to upload the old-fashioned way, it's going to matter more than ever. And so it's really about balancing those two. You know, I've been on book tours since my first book, Beirut to Jerusalem, 1989. And the best question I ever got was in 1999 in Portland, Oregon. I was on tour with Lexus and the Olive Tree, and I was in a theater in Portland. A young man stood up high in the balcony, and he said, "Mr. Friedman, I just have one question for you. Is God in cyberspace?" I thought, wow, is God in cyber? I've never been asked that before. What do I say? I didn't have an answer. Now, I hate being on the stage in front of 5,000 people, and I've got no answer to a question. So I went home, and I called my spiritual leader. I'm of the Jewish faith. I called a rabbi in Amsterdam, Tzvi Marks. I said, "Tzvi, I was out giving a lecture. I got this question I never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said?" And he said, "Well, in our tradition, the Abrahamic tradition, we actually have 2 conceptions of the Almighty. One is he is that this almighty deity who smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure ain't in cyberspace, because it's full of pornography, gambling, bad talk." Okay, so he clearly, God is not in cyberspace. But he says we have a competing view, and that is that God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we behave well in cyberspace, God is in cyberspace. And if we behave badly there, God is not in cyberspace. But one thing is clear: if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. And the reason that is so important, God, you see it in every story in the paper now, is that our kids, yours and mine, are now interacting nakedly. through the internet. The internet is an open sewer of unfiltered, untreated information. So if our citizens and our kids don't have the internal software built into them, the internal filters, to interact now nakedly on this World Wide Web, we're going to have a real problem. We're going to have a real, so that's why this values issue. You know, just to say one more thing, in my list of phrases I'm now hearing, I've added one that I never hear anymore. I've actually added two that you never hear anymore. One is, I think I'd like to sleep on that. When was the last time somebody said, I think I'd like to sleep on that? You know, okay? You never get a chance to sleep on anything. And the other is, we had a terrible story in Colorado 2 weeks ago. High school kids, 100 of them, exchanging nude photographs on their cell phones, using Vault applications. So on your cell phone, it looks like a calculator, and you press the code, and behind it are naked pictures of your classmates in high school. Boys and girls, parents didn't know anything about it. That's being connected, literally nakedly, with no filter and the wrong values. And so this is like a really big issue for me. And there's another phrase you don't hear anymore. Go to your room. Go to your room with your kids. Go to your room. Go to your room. Now, if I were telling my kids go to a room, I'd say, give me your iPhone, your iPad, your iWatch, your Mac, and your wireless card, and then go to your room, okay? So these values questions, I think, are just, they're as important as the other stuff. And that's actually what my book is called, Thank You for Being Late. Because the book actually has a theme song. I'm actually hoping I can buy the song, and so when you open the book, it'll be like a Hallmark card, plays Happy Birthday, okay? Only it'll play this song. And the song is by an American country folk singer named Brandi Carlile. Big Brandi Carlile fan. And the song is called The I, E-Y-E. And the main refrain from the song is, you can dance in a hurricane as long as you're standing in the eye. And I think that's really the challenge. We are all going to be asked to dance in a hurricane. You, me, our kids. But to do that, you need to build an eye. And the eye of a hurricane moves. It draws energy from the hurricane, but it's a place of resilience and stability. And so what Trump is selling in America now, he's selling a wall. Oh, I'm going to protect you from the hurricane. This hurricane will blow down any wall. It's all about how you build an eye and how you build the self-motivation, the learning skills and whatnot, but also don't forget the values part, because that's going to be just as important. Thanks for your question. Yeah, no, I've just got to get passed around. Yeah.
Technology, the digital revolution, and you talked about makers and breakers. There are also solvers in this world, and what would you say about how technology, this digital revolution, can be used now to make this world work better? There are headlines out there about geopolitics being, the trend of the future, but for the solvers out there thinking about the digital revolution, this great inflection point, how can it be used to make the world work better?
Well, I think my general answer to that would be something I learned covering the Arab Spring. So I was in Tahrir Square, I was in Istanbul, I was in Iraq, I was in all these places, Syria. And people have different interpretations what the Arab Spring was about and whatnot, but my interpretation is very simple. It was about a lot of young people living in a context where they felt they couldn't realize their full potential as human beings, but in a flat world where they could see other young people able to do that. And I really think that's what life is about. Am I living in a context that enables, inspires, and nurtures me to realize my full potential? And if you're creating that context for your kids as a parent or a national leader, good things are going to happen. And if you're not, bad things are going to happen. And I always thought, I did a column about this. If I was asked to write the indictment of President Hosni Mubarak, what would I write? And I said that it'd be very simple. I don't think he killed. He was not a killer, Mubarak. I don't think he was all that corrupt. I don't know what he stole, but I don't think he stole that. I don't think he was particularly corrupt. But he was guilty of something worse. The soft bigotry of low expectations about his own people. There is nothing worse than a leader who has low expectations about his own people. The only thing could possibly be worse is a parent who has low expectations about their own kids. And so I think having high expectations, nurturing those expectations, and creating a context where those expectations can be fulfilled, good things will happen. And when you don't, bad things happen. Technology can enable that, or it can disenable that. Over here, yeah, please. You and then you. We'll do both of them together. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mohammed Haji Al-Anazi from Saudi Arabia, a lawyer. Mr. Thomas, I think in the world 6 million people live in the world. Too much.
7 billion, yeah.
7 million,
Yeah.
7. I think my question, when anybody he wants to change the world for the good life, he must understand the language. In my country, some people from some engineering from Europe or from USA or from Britain, they come for the job in my country.
Right.
They stay more than 4 years. They not speak Arabic. Why? He live in, I think, 1.5 million they speak Arabic in the world. Why he don't understand he understand
They don't absorb the culture. Yeah.
I think this is.
I don't know. I think it's hard for me because people probably come to Saudi Arabia for all different kinds of jobs. Some that require the language, some not. I look forward to a day where you don't need any of them to come. That would really be my hope for Saudi Arabia. That people wouldn't look at it as an ATM machine, that place they just come and put their credit card in and get money and then leave, but that be a place that Saudis can have the skill and the inspiration to do all those jobs. So we don't need those people. In fact, we may come to your country and take your jobs. That would be my hope for Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
Thank you. Coincidentally, my question is also about language, but from a slightly different point of view. As a writer, language is obviously central to all that you do.
Yeah.
And as an American native speaker of English, given all that you've said tonight about the future skill set and requirements around employment, around sociability, communication, do you have any reflections on the issue of language in education, and more specifically, where countries have adhered to, say, national language medium of instruction, whether they're ultimately putting their students at a disadvantage? And one sort of piece to that is in the private sector, education provision, often the first characteristic of many private sector systems is either bilingual or English medium education. So my question is around what you see as the role of English in education globally.
Well, it's a good question. My wife actually taught first grade reading. Look, it's such an advantage in the world we're going into, a much more hyper-connected world, that to be a multiple language speaker is obviously going to be just a huge asset going forward. But at the same time, what's amazing is that technology is now, there's not just artificial intelligence, but there's intelligent assistants that thanks to Google, you can get immediate translation and whatnot. I wouldn't rely on that because knowing a language is about more than just knowing the words. It's the people, the culture, the mores, the values. So, certainly, I encourage my kids to study a foreign language. I really can't speak to what's the right mix in one country and others' public schools, but the single greatest advantage a country can have in the age we're going into, in my view, is pluralism. Gender pluralism, idea pluralism, I think religious pluralism. Because in a flat, fast world, if you got pluralism, you got two things. One is you don't have to worry about iron fists from the top down, but you can collaborate with anyone, anywhere. You can be a Lebanese kid in Beirut studying Audacity in Silicon Valley to serve someone in Australia, And one of the things that I think one of America's great advantages is our pluralism, but it's taken us 250 years, and we're still a huge work in progress. One need just read the papers about some of the incidents that have happened in America, police and African American youth, to know that we're still a work in progress. But we've twice now elected a black man whose middle name is Hussein, whose grandfather is a Muslim, who defeated a woman to run against a Mormon. Like, who the hell does that? I mean, so we're pretty freaky in that regard. And, but going forward, that is a great advantage, I think. Yeah. Over down there, yeah. I'm going to move around.
Hi, I have probably 20 questions, so I'll narrow it down to one to make it simple. I guess everything you said, all the examples you gave, every time you were giving an example, I was thinking, why is this better? You gave the example of the automated car, and I'm thinking, okay, I see your point, but why is it better? Mm-hmm. I can see the negatives. You gave the example of the dairy farm where no human has touched this cow. Why is not touching the cow good? Mm-hmm. You gave the example of the waitress at Perkins. And if it was automated, you wouldn't have gotten that extra fruit. Mm-hmm. So all the examples you gave, I'm thinking, I can see the good, but I see more bad. So why is where we're headed better?
That's a really very good question. Next question back there, please. No, it's a very good question, and you should. The best answer is if you Google that New York Times article about the dairy farms and you talk to the farmer, and he says, you know what this allows me? I can spend so much more time actually with the cow. Okay, I can study veterinary science. I can actually spend so much more time actually nurturing the health of that animal than I was when I was completely hassled, having to milk it, figure out when to artificially inseminate it, et cetera. But your question's a very good one. And when I wrote The World is Flat, I made a central point about all of this stuff. It's everything and its opposite, And it's incredibly empowering and incredibly disempowering. It's incredibly pluralizing, incredibly homogenizing. So it's really about how we as human beings get the best out of it and cushion the worst. But it's really got both. But I think if you talk to educators, the whole idea is bringing more technology into the classroom allows students to learn much more on their own. So at my daughter's school, Khan Academy Lab School, they basically, they have no grade levels. So the year starts with every student, this is grades, first grade through 8th grade now. Every student makes a contract with their teacher and their parent about what they're going to learn. And then they map out exactly the progress to that goal. And as they master each level, they move on to the next. Now what that allows is the teacher, rather than standing in front of the room being the so-called sage on the stage, to leverage technology to do a lot of that rote stuff and spend a lot more time with each student. So that's when it works best. But I would be the first to tell you, there's a lot about this world I really don't like. Just understand I didn't do this. I'm just writing about it. But there are a lot of things about it that the old-fashioned person in me, I don't like pressing 9 and then pressing 4 and then pressing 3. I'd like to talk to a human being, thank you, metaphorically. And there are a lot of people who are going to get just really caught up in this vortex, who can't dance in a hurricane and don't have an eye. And so I'm actually, I'm actually net worried about it all, because it's coming so fast. I feel in writing this book like I've got a butterfly net and I'm chasing a butterfly, and each time I get near it, it moves. And so I'm having to re-interview people like for the 3rd time, and I just interviewed them 9 months ago because the change is so fast. And so you're asking a good question. I think in a lot of cases, the everything and its opposite, that you can actually find that it allows you to be more human, to have more time. And maybe when we have self-driving cars, we're just going to have so much consumer surplus that we're going to have more time for recreation and whatnot, and maybe we'll just pay people who used to be in the middle class. The winners take all, we'll just pay other people. I think we're headed for some really radical stuff that we're just beginning to think about. And Brynjolfsson and McAfee, who wrote The Second Machine Age, their next book is about that. Like, actually, what will we do with the middle class? And how will those people lead a fulfilling life? And I think it's going to be a big challenge, and I think it's in our front windshield faster than we think. So thanks for your question. Yeah, the young lady there.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that you brought the word emotion into this whole talk today.
Thank you.
I'm an assistant professor of physical therapy at Kuwait University.
Huh.
And a lot of research looks into predicting whether the patient is going to respond to a specific treatment.
Interesting.
And basing our entire field on prediction is fantastic, but we forget emotion.
Yeah.
And every patient responds differently because of emotion. And with what the world is coming to now, I feel emotion and awareness is starting to die down. And so where do you think, how far along are we in terms of emotion and awareness, and what do you think in terms of, how soon can we bring that back into the equation?
Yeah. Well, as I alluded, you won't find me on Twitter. You won't find me on Facebook. You'll find me at this evening, organized by Osama, talking to you, because that's how I learn. I know who my friends are, and they're not one click. And anyone who writes an anonymous comment on my column in the New York Times, I'm not interested in, because anything anonymous, I'm not interested in. And so I don't read any of that stuff. I learn by talking to people still, and that's how I came in, and that's how I'm going to go out. I'm not following a Twitter feed. If I don't know in a millisecond, when the fire happened or when the bad guy was caught, I'll get it 5 minutes later, I'll be okay. And if I spend those 5 minutes talking to you, people, God bless them, have bodies and souls. And the great mistake we make always is thinking you can just feed one and not the other. And so I really learn in a very old-fashioned way. By the way, being my source is exhausting, because it's not just, hey, what's new in physical therapy? You'll say something to me, I'll go home, think about it. I'll call you the next day. And we'll talk some more. And then I'll tell you, you really haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet. And I'll call you the next day. And so that's how I learn. And I just kind of tune out a lot of stuff, because there's just so much noise there. But it isn't just noise, it prevents actually, human beings interacting like this. And so I think there's just so much garbage out there, with all this stuff. And I'm sure there's a great value to Twitter, and I'm sure there's a great value to Facebook. But for myself, it kind of doesn't work for me. I actually like talking to people face to face and making friends the old-fashioned way. And so, I'm really glad I had my career when I had it. I pity young journalists now who have to, tweet and post and, because every time you're tweeting something and doing that, you're actually not talking to somebody. So I think we actually miss a lot. And so I'm an old fart. I'm going to go out as an old fart, and I'm lucky I can do that, frankly. I appreciate that, but I'm going to take advantage of my luck. The gentleman behind you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas,
Thank you.
for an incredibly inspiring talk.
Thank you.
I actually also have around 12 questions for you, but I'll spare everyone's time.
That's a great compliment.
And
Thank you.
I'll just ask one. So thank you for putting forward the essential tenets of entrepreneurship and innovation that I completely agree with you are essential to continued growth today in this world. This talk is being given at the Arab Fund, which, as you mentioned, is an established institution since the 1960s. What I wonder is, have you spent some of your time in Kuwait checking out the youth-based grassroots entrepreneurial initiatives that this country now has to offer? Have you visited Sardab Lab, a 24-hour entrepreneurs cafe and workspace? Have you heard about the Secret Garden Project, a permaculture initiative started by a chef that walked away from the fine dining lifestyle? Nuqad Creative Conference, Kuwait Books, a one-of-its-kind second-hand bookstore, the Boro Life, a hybrid lifestyle gym and brand based on an Alice in Wonderland theme. Have you been to any of these places? Have you heard of them? Would you like to see them? And what do you think the innovative entrepreneurial scene looks like, and where is it going in Kuwait?
Great. Well, the answer, alas, is no. I've only been here 24 hours, but I'm glad to know, and I may take you up on your invitation. But if you read my column today, because I came here from Dubai, I actually wrote about, my column was all based on entrepreneurial initiatives in Dubai, where they've cloned a camel. A cloned camel gave birth, and I wrote about Careem, CAREEM.com, the new Uber-like app, spreading through the Arab world to compete with Uber, because. And by the way, if you followed my columns from Dubai, I write them, every time I go there, that's all I want to talk to. I want to just talk to the starter-uppers, And I have no illusions how big they are, whatnot, but I'm actually trying to affirm them, give them a little airtime with my column, and hopefully other people will see that and say, hey, that's really cool. Because, that's really the only hope. It's getting young people inspired to start stuff, and by the way, to fail. In Silicon Valley, it's going bankrupt can be a sign of well, I'd like to hire you. It means you tried something, and you probably learned a lot from failing. You should learn more from your failures than your successes. So, I know there is a startup scene here. In the Arab world in general. I've heard a little bit about Kuwait. I know what's going on in Jordan. I've written about that, and Dubai. And I just hope it gets multiplied, that to me, you can't do enough to simply tomorrow pass whatever laws those people need. I'd call those young people into the parliament and simply say, what do you all need, you young men and women, to start more companies? You write the bill, we'll pass it. I'm a huge believer that brains are distributed equally, but opportunities aren't. And, I think it's all about unleashing that power because I know it's here. So thank you. And we'll take you up on your offer. All the way back, yeah. Whoever.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes. Possibly human history can be viewed as a progression of improvement of productivity from the very beginning of the agricultural revolution, original, and various Sumerian development, so on and so forth, industrial revolution, and the 20th century. Basically, it is to produce more at less cost, and the nth degree of this analysis, which you just proposed in your thesis today, was to have a machine replace a human. And this is one scenario where mankind can sit back and enjoy the fruits of a machine. Is this heaven? Or alternatively, is it hell? Because mankind won't have the earning power to purchase the output that these machines produce. And then are we looking at mass extinctions? Interesting ideas. We still don't see the end picture. Innovators and entrepreneurs, by definition and by theory of probability, rarely succeed. Only a small percentage of entrepreneurs or innovators end up succeeding. The vast majority die, close down, shut down, go bankrupt. So probably we're looking at hell, not heaven. Thank you.
You always regret taking that last question. No, it's a very good question. And what I would say to you is this, I'm actually more optimistic, but you asked the question, and it's a good question, and I like the way you posed it provocatively. If horses could have voted, there never would have been cars, okay? And if cab drivers could have voted, there'd never be Uber, okay? So whoever thought we would find a new way to catch cabs? I mean, it just seemed like that's what it was, And I think that there's no limit to human ingenuity. I will point out where we've got all this tech thing and all this tech thing and all this stuff I'm talking about. Unemployment in America is at a low, all-time low for the last 15 years, 5%. So something's going on. So when I do book talks, and sometimes I do book signings after, I always interview everybody who comes through the line. What do you do? What do you do? And I was speaking a couple years ago at the Convention of Convention Makers in Orlando. Gigantic, like 15,000 people, signing books afterwards. And a woman came through the line. She seemed nicely dressed. And I said, what do you do? She said, I represent the city of San Jose, California in Washington, D.C. I'm saying to myself, whoever thought there was a job representing San Jose in Washington, D.C.? But she clearly had that job. I bet she was probably making, a very nice, maybe six-figure salary. That you will never see this coming. I mean, I remember when Google came out. I used to do this riff where your son or daughter comes home from college, and you say, first semester, say, honey, what are you going to major in? Your daughter says, Dad, I'm going to be a search engine optimizer. I say, what are you talking about? You couldn't be an ophthalmologist? You're going to be a search engine optimizer? So a whole new industry got spawned because whether you appeared on the first page of Google when you Googled tennis racket made a huge difference if you were on the second page, and a multi-billion-dollar industry was born overnight on optimizing search results. I got to go through all this rigmarole when I write the headlines for my columns on what will be most attractive to the Google algorithm so people will notice it on Facebook. We now have, what are they called? There's a job, in fact, there's a bunch of jobs at the New York Times called audience engagement managers. Oh my God. That's like for me, that's like a sign of the apocalypse, But that's like a $75,000 a year job now, audience engagement managers. So I'm a little more optimistic. Where you're right in your concern is this, is that on a relative basis, more labor, if it is done by machines than humans, then owners of the machines, i.e. owners of capital, will get a larger percentage of GDP than owners of labor. And that we are seeing, and that's the source of the income gaps that we're seeing and are getting wider. And that's going to be a job of government to ameliorate that. But there's a famous story that back in the 1820s, I believe, or it was 1920s, I don't remember, it doesn't matter, some guy proposed closing the American Patent Office because everything that was going to be invented had been invented. So I'm a little more optimistic.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now we're going to move the discussion to the first level, and you'll have one more hour to actually.
I'm not sure I got
finish
one
the
more
question.
hour in me, Osama, but anyways, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody who stayed.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like, I would like to thank Chairman Abdel Latif Al-Hamad for his vision and his advice for making this series possible. Don't forget to pick up the program for the upcoming events. Thank you, Tom, for your insight. Thank you for the fascinating ideas. I know you're going to bring them on board in your book. And thank you very much, Aliad Duaij, for the wonderful work you have done for organizing this conference, for all the CEF staff. Aliad Duaij is over there, and all the staff of the CEF and the Arab Fund. Thank you.
And they want to interview me, and I said, but I told them, I'm not a